Good morning, good afternoon, everybody who's listening in, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Start Network CEO, Christina Bennett, and this is the first session of our 2023 Annual Assembly. But before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge the context in which this assembly is taking place. The current crisis in the Middle East has brought about unimaginable human suffering, both in Gaza and in Israel, suffering that was and is preventable. Suffering that is in the hands of regional and global leaders who seemingly lack the courage or the conviction to end it. And suffering that many of us as humanitarians feel powerless to address, while Gaza remains under siege, while aid is still largely blocked, and while ordinary people and humanitarian workers are fleeing for their lives. So this is not to place a higher value on one region suffering over another. You know, and I know, that civilian suffering is happening everywhere, in too many places, in Ukraine, in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Sudan, just to name a few. All of those civilians deserve our attention, our collective voice, and our resources. But today in the Middle East, the repeated violation and flagrant disrespect for international law, for protecting civilians, for preserving human life and dignity, and on and since the 7th of October is especially horrifying and very deeply sad to me, and I know to many of you. So while I would like to acknowledge the suffering of civilians around the world, I want to repeat the message that START Network members signed and published in a written statement on the Middle East last week. The START Network of more than 80 local, national, and international aid organizations is deeply worried by the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The recent arrival of aid through the Rafah crossing is wholly inadequate for the millions of Gazans facing an increasingly desperate situation. We demand an immediate ceasefire. We demand significantly increased and sustained humanitarian aid, including water, food, fuel, and medical supplies. We demand that all parties protect civilians and humanitarian workers on all sides. We condemn violence in all its forms and are extremely concerned with the recent escalation. All parties must obey international humanitarian law and ensure that human dignity is maintained without exception. As the CEO of START Network, I also sent a letter to all of our Western donors, which include members of the permanent members of the UN Security Council, demanding the same. We will keep up pressure across all of our stakeholder groups until these demands are met. And thanks to you, all of you, our members, for supporting our joint advocacy on this. Please help us to continue to keep that pressure up, including through your own donors, your own stakeholders, your own networks. But at the same time, we need to press forward for delivering a new era of humanitarian action for those communities in crisis. And today, the work of START Network is needed now more than ever. So let's begin this Assembly 2023 and turn to this first session and our topic for discussion, which is our new strategy, 2024 to 2026. And together with my colleague, Ian Burbidge, I am pleased to kick off this assembly with an introduction of this strategy and a discussion of what takes place in it. We hope you've had a chance to read it through the briefing document we sent ahead of this meeting, but just in case you haven't, Ian and I are going to take you through some of it now. So first, a bit about our journey. Ian, please advance the slides. Thanks. Perfect. So from the START Evolves design process in 2017 to our spinoff as an independent organization in 2019, we've had two strategies in quick succession, aimed to accelerate systems change, aimed to pivot the organization toward locally led action and toward anticipatory action, growing our offer every year to new countries and regions. But if there's anything I've learned in my 4 years leading this network, is that change needs action. Ian, can you advance the slides, please? and that even if there's broad recognition and commitment to doing things differently, we've all made commitments to reform humanitarian aid, whether it's the Grand Bargain, the Charter for Change, the Pledge for Change, and yet all of the evidence from a range of independent reports suggests that tangible progress toward that transformation is in short supply. It turns out it's much easier to commit to reform and much harder to action it. So the place like START Network is where that kind of clear vision and laser focus on delivering funding channels, innovative network solutions, it's where that transformation begins and where it flourishes. So the headline of this new strategy is necessarily change means action, with a clear vision of what we want the future to look like and a laser focus of delivering that transformation through practical action. Next slide, please, Ian. So before we get into the meat of the strategy, a bit of a refresher as to what this strategy is based on, and that is START Evolves. That was a 9-month process involving stakeholders inside and outside the network to determine the network's future. The vision that that group came up with in 2017 is broken down into 4 component parts. You may not be able to see them clearly on this screen, but I'll go through them now quickly. First, a network of networks made up of country and regional hubs that bring greater efficiency and effectiveness to the work of all of its members by working together on funds and financing and achieving a network effect. That network of networks is fueled by a family of funds, including the START funds, which you all should know very well, specializing in fast funding to small and medium-sized crises, and an advanced financing facility that acts ahead of crises where they are predictable based on risk models and based on triggers. The network and the family of funds is governed by a constituent assembly of members and hubs that provide a space for consensus building, global network governance, and guide the current and future direction of that network, and supported by a platform that supports the network with funding, advocacy, and a suite of services. It also acts as the network secretariat. Next slide, please, Ian. So we've actually made quite a bit of progress in the last 4 years to that vision. We've begun the transition that you see here from a centralized global network to that more distributed network of networks that now is made up of 10 hubs in various stages of development and with a few expected to become independent next year. Next slide. We've also grown our family of funds and financial instruments. The Global START Fund will celebrate its 10-year anniversary in 2024, having dispersed £125 million across 6 continents to its members. We launched that advanced financing facility that was envisioned in START Evolves. It's now called START Ready. We launched it at COP26 in 2021, and in its 2 years of operation, it's proven to be one of the most innovative financing mechanisms in our sector. Both the our family of START funds and START Ready are at the exclusive use of civil society, of our members. And it is important that we continue to grow these funds as faster, more agile, more relevant alternatives to the funds run by others, such as the UN system, which still receives 2/3 of donor funding. Next slide, please. So here we are, with more than a decade of systems change under our belt, 4 years of implementing our vision as an independent organization, and on the cusp of this new strategy that will help us refine our value offer based on the changes we wish to see. And what are these changes? A shift in power, decision-making, and voice closer to the front lines, and especially to local and national organizations. A shift in resources increasingly to local organizations and increasingly in advance of crises. And a shift in practice to become more risk-willing, more accessible by community designs and decisions. And we will do this by modeling ourselves as a membership, what that new era of humanitarian action looks like, operates like, and behaves like in practice. Ian, over to you.
Thanks, Christina, and hi, everyone. Excited to join you all on our assembly kickoff today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ian Burbridge and I'm Head of Systems Innovation and Change. And I'm just going to take you briefly through some of the detail underpinning the strategy in the next few moments. So let's start with purpose, the reason that we exist as an organization. And we've clarified and set that out at the top of this slide as to be a catalyst for system level change. That's why we were set up. That's the work that Christina's pre-seed or reviewed, and that's the work that we're here to do, create that change within the system. And that's in service to our longer term vision, which is for a locally led and proactive humanitarian system. That's our headline. When we dig a little bit deeper, we are supporting accountability to people affected by and at risk of crises, saving more lives, promoting dignity, and protecting people from loss and harm. So a locally led and proactive system is our vision. That's the change that we want to see in the world. And then our mission is our organizational contribution to that change. And that's to develop, test, and spread new ways of collaborating, of operating, and of resourcing locally led and proactive humanitarian action. It's about designing and testing alternatives to the current system. But we recognize that we can't achieve system change on our own as an organization. That vision can't be met by Start Network working in isolation. And so it's important that we work closely with wider actors across the system, our partners, our members, our donors, policymakers and advocates, academics and scientists, the media, people that are also coming behind that vision for change. And how we do it, that shows up in our values as an organization, about putting people first, operating collectively, being brave and inclusive and open and ethical in all of our work. And so our strategy is at the heart of all of that, how we bring those things to life in our work. And as you'll see over the next couple of slides, how we leverage our strengths, our value offer in order to develop those practical alternatives to the current system. And so we look at our value offer as having identified these 4 core strengths within our organization and within our work. First of all, we're a networker. So we support collaboration across our growing network of members, of donors, of stakeholders through our network of hubs. And we use that network to connect, to share, to build momentum for change, to aggregate ideas, services, and foster collaboration. We also see ourselves as a funder, and Christina summarised Start Fund and Start Ready. We enable our members to access that rapid, early and risk-informed funding, that we continue to evolve and design and test new ways of getting money into communities where it's most needed as effectively as possible. And those funds and finance mechanisms enable us to generate evidence about what works, about what doesn't work, and use that evidence to influence for change, as we'll hear about in a moment. And we also have a strength as an innovator about testing new things, about not settling for the status quo, about challenging the way that things are done, experimenting, surfacing new ideas, working across our network to develop and test those alternatives to the way that things are currently done. And in all of those 3 areas of work, we're generating insights and learning about what works, about how we change the system, about what doesn't work. And we use those insights and learning to influence for change. And that's, I think, something that we've really strengthened in this strategy, is the need to take others with us on a system change journey. So our thesis really, if there is one that underpins this strategy, is that when we bring these strengths together, we as an organization are maximizing our ability to create the practical change that Christina touched on in her talk. How do we do that? Well, as you can see from the Venn diagram, we seek to bring those 3 core strengths of networker, funder, and innovator together in all of our work, in everything that we're designing and testing. That's where we believe we really have a unique offer and something different that enables us to create the change that we're advocating for within the system. But we recognize that this is a complex situation. Of course it is. and the extent to which we have control over that shifts. So the diagram on the left really tries to get this idea of, if you like, an onion, that there are different layers to the system, to the work that we do. So there's our own organizational change, how we advocate, how we support changes within the system. There's our wider network, as Christina says, expanding globally, our members and our hubs. We have influence, and the members have influence in their localities as well as globally through those network effects. And then at the broader system level change, we're still seeking to shift beliefs, to shift practices across the wider system. So we operate from the local to the global in that respect. And how we bring those together, how we leverage our strengths, is at the heart of this strategy. So let's look at what that means in practice. This is a busy slide. Hopefully you've had a quick look at it in the pre-read. On the left-hand side, you can see each of these rows represents one of our areas of strength, to which we've added our own organizational development at the bottom, which is our need to continuously evolve as an organization, as Start Network, to ensure that we're keeping ahead of the curve, that we're constantly pushing the envelope as to what's possible in our own work, and that our systems and our processes and our support to staff are enabling us to do that. The other 4 crucial areas of strength in this table, we've summarized, as you can see, the impact that we think each of those strengths enables us to achieve on its own. As I say, our core value is when we bring them together, but by necessity of presentation, we've summarized it here in this way. There's an objective for each of the 4, and I'll run through those briefly. But then we also set out a direction of travel, because as we know in system change, we can't define an endpoint and then get to a situation where we can just tick it and say, yes, we've achieved that. Sure, we can achieve steps on a journey, but it's an evolving journey, and one that, as you'll have seen from the start of this presentation, that we've been on for some time. So our objectives in each of these 4 areas, our objective as a networker is to build and diversify our network of networks through our members and through our locally led hubs, and support those hubs on their journey to independence. Our strength as a funder is about scaling our family of funds, diversifying our financial products, and expanding our coverage of countries and risks across our network. Real focus on increasing access to funding by local organizations here. In innovation, our innovation strength is about advancing practice, continuously designing and testing new ideas, seeing what might land and what might work within the sector. And as an influencer, it's about taking people with us on this change journey. As I've said, it's about dropping the evidence out, building a coalition for change behind our vision for the future. Of course, the detail flows from this, but this is a high-level summary of how we're taking these areas of strength forwards. And then, as I say, recognizing that system change is a journey, not a destination, we have framed this as an inquiry-led strategy. In other words, it's really important that we set out the questions that we're seeking answers to through our work about how the system is changing, about the need for change. And the full strategy sets out some of those questions. But we've identified 3 core sort of areas of focus for our learning. Clearly, there's learning about Start Network as an organization, our performance, more traditional metrics around how well we're doing. There's how we're contributing to change. How does our work through the hubs, through our financial products, through our emerging innovations, how does our work contribute to change in itself? And then more broadly, how is the wider system changing? And that, that's hard to evidence that that's down to our work in isolation, but we need to be tracking the changes within the system to see what's happening, so that we can be always responding to the conditions within which we're working. And the diagram on the right summarizes some work we've done based on the Rockwell Foundation's work around keys to change. And these are really often the invisible currency that flows within a complex system. The purpose of the system, the practices that exist. The practices might be a little bit more visible. Relationships and power, how the power dynamics play out across the system, or how resources are managed and flow, are often harder to surface. And these are lenses that we look at the system through in order to see the extent to which things are changing. And then finally, some thoughts around growth. We've given a lot of thought to how this plays out in practice and how the organisation needs to shift and change to support these ambitions. So we know we need to grow in order to demonstrate our viability and sustainability. We need to have enough critical mass to be able to trigger system change, to be able to create the impact that we believe is necessary. Our growth is clearly determined by the growth of our network, so our members and our hubs, and has to be aligned and balanced with our ability then to deliver funds and innovation across the network. We're looking to increase our disbursement capacity in those funds, Start Funds and Start Ready, and in our hub-based initiatives with our membership growth, and making sure that we retain the organisational capacity in order to deliver that. So there's a balance in there as we try and hold our strengths in an appropriate, bringing them together in an appropriate way to deliver the change that we believe is possible. It's about ensuring that we keep our funds, our membership, our partnerships in an appropriate balance with our ambitions. So finally, those of you like me that loves a diagram, I've pulled all of these different aspects together into a short plan on a page. This is, of course, a left to right linear representation of something that's much more evolutionary and complex than that. However, on the left-hand side, you can see our critique of the humanitarian system that Christina set out in those black boxes, the sort of 5 core aspects of the system that we want to address. On the right-hand side, you can see the vision for change that we're striving towards. And then our purpose, our mission, our values, how we go about our journey towards that vision with our partners. Blending our strengths as a networker, funder and innovator in order to influence for change, and change both within our organisation, across our network, and at the wider system level. Accumulating in those sort of lenses on the system, particularly power, resources and relationships. So I'm going to pause there and hand back to Christina for any final reflections before we will have an opportunity for a bit of a Q&A with our audience. Christina.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for taking us through all of that. And I hope that was understandable to all of you. It's a bit of a complex strategy, but I think a really, really exciting one. So there you have it in front of you, the strategy 2024 to 2026 that combines our strengths as a diverse and collaborative network, innovative funding and financing, our ability to experiment, to have impact and influence through the evidence of our practice and our experience, all packaged together in a practical program for transformation and change. And importantly, this vision that we've set before you today puts you, our members, in the center of it. It's about us delivering value as a network through you for the rest of the sector, co-designing the new era of humanitarian action that we all wish to see together, and helping us to implement it and scale it as a collaborative. But the transformation that we've all been talking about isn't easy, and it will come with tensions and trade-offs that will require us, each of us, to sort of reflect on our role in this transformation and change, to adapt our own mindsets and behaviors and the ways that our organizations behave. But doing this in the name of more effective, more efficient, and more ethical humanitarian action, and a future of humanitarian aid that means that we can deal collectively with the crises that we see before us, which, as I'm sure you agree, are increasingly more worrying and increasingly more intense. So I just leave you with a final thought, which is change means action, and action means change. That is the theme of this assembly and that is the theme of our strategy. So now over to you for some questions. I think I've been told to go to the Q&A tab, and there are some questions there. Let's see. There's one question to put the link to the new strategy in the chat. We can, I believe, do that. Ian, will you go and grab it, the link from where we have this presentation? I can't see the Q&A box. Paraz, can you put the questions in the chat, which I can see?
Okay, let me put the question.
No, never mind. I've opened it now. Thanks very much, Paraz. I think there's one question in here. Okay, sorry if I've missed this, but what is the major difference between the current strategy and the proposed strategy? Much of the material doesn't seem to be terribly different from what we are already focused on. So I can take that, and maybe Ian, if you wanted to come in as well. So the vision for Start Network remains the same. It's the vision that we've been operating based on for a few years. The strategy is not a revolutionary change from the vision that we've been working toward. It is a continuation, a crystallization, a greater focus of the work that we've been doing for the past few years. I would say that the past strategy, the strategy that ends this year, has really been about developing the concepts in Start Evolves, testing them, seeing what works, what doesn't work. As I said in the introduction, we've launched 10 hubs in that process. We've launched Start Ready, a new financial instrument. We've scaled our funds across the board. And we've worked with communities more directly in those hubs on their own innovations. What this new strategy is about is in part about growth, in part about taking the hub model that we've developed and exporting it to others, delivering our hubs as independent organizations, enabling them to become independent organizations, and really crystallizing our offer as an advocate and influencer in the name of the membership. So while it is not a revolution from the past strategy, it is an advancement, it is a further focus, it is an evolution of that strategy. Ian, anything else you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, I think that's right, Christina. I think the other thing that we've tried to do is to sort of deepen our thinking around system change and how it happens and how we can show up as an organization in respect of that. So I think, as you say, the advocacy piece is strengthened. I think the learning piece around system change and what it takes to change a system is strengthened. I think the need for experimentation is strengthened as well. So those are three sort of key things for me. And as I say, I think it's about having an appropriate balance between those strengths and how we can hold those in our work.
Great. Okay, there's another question. How much of the old strategy was achieved, and what were the biggest achievements and or failures? So I don't have the actual KPIs in front of me, but I guess what I would say is about the old strategy that we delivered on our ambitions to, as I said, get that vision up and running and testing it to see if it works. So for example, of the 10 hubs that we set out to set up, we did set up 10 hubs. So what's gone well is that we've had 10 groups of civil society organizations in 10 countries around the world decide that they would like to become Start Network hubs. We've enabled them to come together as civil society organizations and begin working together as agents for change in their countries and communities. I suppose what has worked less well with the hubs is the time that it's taken to bring hubs together, the time that it takes for diverse sets of organizations to find complementarity as international, national, and local organizations, to really find what each of their roles is, to not compete, but to collaborate, to share and not and to share resources and not see themselves as competing for them, and to engage in programs, whether it's developing a risk model or embarking on an innovation program. It's a way of working that isn't, the usual humanitarian supply chain of contractor, donor, recipient, and then subcontractor. It's a new way of working, and that new way of working is taking time. I suppose on the fund side, we reached our financial targets in terms of expanding our funds, both on the Start Funds side, and that includes the Global Start Fund Nepal, and Start Fund Bangladesh. We also launched Start Ready, which was a major milestone. Start Ready had been under development for quite some time, and we launched it during this current strategy, during the past strategy. We've got a £5 million risk pool now that we're operating, and we've got eight different risks in 6 different countries, or maybe 8 different countries at this point, and learning every day about how anticipatory action and risk-based financing works. I suppose for that, what has worked less well is we've seen donor interest in pooled funds, in anticipation, ebb and flow. In 1 minute, it is the new shiny object of the humanitarian system that everybody wants to glom onto. At the next moment, we're hearing about we've been notified of cuts, and we're having to rearrange some of our budgets to adapt to them. And anticipatory action one day seems like a really well understood and accepted way of working. And then on the other hand, we hear lots that we need more evidence. We're not totally convinced by it. So I think we have more work to do there on our funds. Our vision for growth in this next strategy is still to grow those funds, not exponentially, but in line with the membership and the membership demands. And I think as our members grow, and your demands on our funds increase, we need to make sure that we have very good relationships with a diverse set of donors in order to be able to deliver those funds for you. Because while it's not just the funds that hold this network together, it's some of what holds this network together and some of the expectations that you have on us. Ian, was there anything else you felt that was that worked well about the last strategy, and anything that we tried to correct with this new strategy?
I think the only other thing I'd mention, and maybe this links to a little bit to Jane's comment in the Q&A around external systemic challenges, is the last strategy was, prepared and launched during the period of COVID, which had a big impact for many of us. So I think what we've taken the opportunity to do here is just to do a little bit more of a reflection and a look around and see what's necessarily needed. And how we're well placed to do that as an organisation. And I think that's why working with staff to pull together the sort of background papers, we've identified these core strengths that we have as an organisation and really see those as our DNA that need to flow through everything that we do. And so perhaps, Jane, if I can pick up your question around what are those main external systemic challenges, I think there's probably a couple of core things for me. One is clearly the demand for humanitarian responses, the increasing number and intensity of crises that we're seeing, and that I suspect we'll continue to see, not just environmentally driven, but as we're seeing in other areas of the world, politically so as well. And I think so how that plays out in the next few years is going to, there's not enough money in the system as it is. So how no change is not an option, because we need to respond and we need to find new ways of responding effectively, because what's worked in the past isn't going to work in the future. And I think if we take that longer term time horizon, that's something that's really playing in my mind at the moment. And then I guess the other thing is, when we're talking about system change, the system is pretty well established to do what it currently does. And that includes challenging new ideas. And so often we see in change initiatives that the system will crowd out new things because some people are well served by the way it currently works. Power structures hold things in place as they currently are, and we see that change becomes difficult as a result. So there's almost like a self-serving aspect to a current system. And so one of our challenges is how we can overcome that, and how we can fight our way through that immunity to change, if you want to call it that, which exists in every complex system. So those would be a couple of external systemic challenges that I would identify. I don't know, Christina, if you wanted to build on that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ian. There are a few things that pop into my mind as well, and I agree with everything that Ian has said. I think one of the other challenges that I see is just noise. Noise with a lot of different networks and organizations trying to launch similar reform initiatives and similar change initiatives. And it will take all of us to change the system together. But I think it's really hard to cut through that noise with messages of quality. I sort of feel like we've been at this for, in terms of the funds for 10 years. We have a way of working that's proven to work and proven to be a very high quality. Similarly, we've been working on Start Ready and our risk models for some time, and have a way of working that that is highly technical and has evolved over years. And I think some organizations that get into some of these reform agendas quickly don't necessarily do it with the same attention to detail and the same attention to quality, which may have an impact on the whole enterprise, have an impact on the whole reform agenda. Because if it's done badly and the evidence isn't there to prove that it is whether it's locally led action or anticipatory action is a better way of working, then we stand all to lose from poor quality. So I think it's about all of us together trying to learn from our practice, learn from our experience, and really internalize those lessons of what works and what doesn't work, so that we can all kind of bring ourselves up together. I think one other sort of external factor is, just the system itself and the enduring business models and incentives that we all work toward, that are determined somewhat by the people that fund us, that are determined somewhat by the way that the UN operates. And I don't see that changing as quickly as I would like to see that change. I don't see the incentives changing for us so that we can be a network that works in different ways, that uses our funds and distributes our funds and allocates them using different methods and different channels than we have in the past. Sometimes, and especially in times of crisis, we see organizations and systems reverting to business as usual, because it's what they know and they fall back on it, rather than using crisis potentially as opportunity to do things better, more efficiently, more effectively, and more ethically. So that's what I would add to that. I'm going to look to see if there are more questions. Why do you think this new strategy is going to work better than before, and what are those key changes? Okay, Deepak, thanks very much for that. And I will maybe start again and let Ian, you can finish up with that one. So I think what I would say is that we've learned quite a bit in piloting the hubs, in launching Start Ready, in working with our hubs, with INGOs, national NGOs, and local NGOs at hub level on numerous projects and initiatives. We've learned a lot about what works, what gives rise to tensions, where we can stretch, where we need to pull back. And so as I said earlier, I think what this strategy does is takes that learning and that practice and really focuses it on the things that we can do best, that crystallizes our offer in terms of being a networker, a funder, an innovator, and an influencer based on evidence. And I think it's using the evidence from the past, 3 years since during the last strategy to influence the way that we do things differently. Maybe some specific examples of that would be the way that we support the hubs, the type of funding that we need to incubate them properly, the length of time we know it will take, and the patience that we need to have with hubs to pull their own membership together. The tools that hubs need in order for to be able to evolve themselves. On the fund side, we're learning a lot about the complementarity between Start Funds and Start Ready, and where sort of anticipation works well. What we need to, where risk models do well for which hazards, and where we need to really refine our risk models for different hazards around the world. And then I think as an organization, as the START Network platform, as the Secretariat, we've learned a lot about how we need to run our organization, where we can find efficiencies, where we need to build up our staff resources in certain areas of the business to be able to support you, the members, and the ambition that we've got in this strategy going forward. So we will be sort of we have started to reorganize some of our we've done a functional review of the gaps that we have in the organization, and are starting to plug those gaps with resources that we can better support the strategy. So those are some specific examples. Ian, anything from you?
Thanks, Christina. I think just briefly for me, the only other thing I would add is we're working, I think, more intentionally to define the impact that we think our different products, our work has on the system. So I call that routes to impact. So in all of our work, what's our theory around how that's going to shift the system that we're testing? And that's about going all the way on a sort of a pipeline of ideas, from early stage ideas through to developing draft concepts, through to tested and proven examples like Start Fund. And then it's about, and so what next, and having a longer term perspective on all of our work, I think. So I think that's something that we've sort of layered in as a nuance to this strategy, perhaps over the previous one. Could talk a lot more about that, and for those of you that are going to be in Nairobi, we'll get into that a little bit in some of the sessions that we'll be hosting. Looking at the time, I think I'm going to hand back to Christina to draw this session to a close, and thank everybody for your questions. We'll get back to those that we haven't had a chance to answer after the event.
Great, thanks, Ian. And maybe I will close this because we're at time, but there is one last question about the politics of humanitarian action and the politics of our advocacy. And yeah, I know, Gilbert, it's very frustrating because as humanitarians, we have very little power to change the politics of those global leaders that hold so much of what you see in the world in their hands. But I don't think that we should be quiet. I think we are actively speaking to politicians about what we're seeing on the ground. And I think we can use our collective voice and really our, what we are seeing on the ground, what actions of politicians, what the consequences are. And I think, whoops, the lights just went out in here. And I think by painting a picture of the humanitarian or the human consequences of political action, we can have leverage on how those politicians act. But yeah, I agree. It's very frustrating to sit back and not be able to influence the politics as directly as we might. But I think, as I've learned over the years, we have to influence them through the eyes and ears of what we see as the human impact of their actions. Changing the humanitarian system is also highly dependent on politics, which is why we need to be working as a collective to change the incentives for how humanitarian aid is delivered, and how donors and their strategies are oriented toward us as civil society organizations, and how they affect the way that we work. So if we can get to those incentives and ask politicians to change the way that they see and fund us, we can begin to get at the politics. But again, it's a big ask of humanitarians to engage in those political discussions. But with that, I will end this session because now we're 2 minutes over and my timekeepers will be angry with me for going over. But I just wanted to say that thanks to all of you for joining. Thanks to all of you for listening about the strategy. We will have another few discussions about it in Nairobi in person. But for those of you who won't be there, please reach out to us and ask more questions if you will. The next session in this assembly is in 15 minutes on the half hour. It's on the impact of climate change on small to medium scale crises, the role of START funds, which will bring you the insights that we have from an independent team of researchers on how START Network is responding to climate change. So the link to that event is now in the chat. So you can join the session directly from that link. It starts in 13 minutes. And I hope you all enjoy it. And I hope you all stay for the rest of the day and enjoy the rest of the sessions. Thanks so much for your support, and we look forward to seeing you in Nairobi and throughout our work together. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.